Hey everybody, how you doing? It's Brian. Welcome to the For Us Therapeutics Podcast. I'm Dr. B.
I'm Dr. Lakeith.
And before we get into today's topic, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Okay, so today's topic is this: Are Black people tripping? And in this segment, we're going to start off with the topic of, are Black people tripping about these gender wars? Now, Keith, I want you to lay the foundation for it because you're the one that brought up the topic as far as people sitting down listening to these male and female perspectives from these people with big platforms as if like they're true or this is how it should be. If I didn't say it right, please correct me.
Oh, no, you said it right. So this was birthed from the fact that I don't know about anybody else's algorithm, but my algorithm on Instagram and the Reels on Facebook recently has been these debates among men and women, particularly Black men and Black women, or it's just a solitary Black man or solitary Black woman just speaking about their gripes or their issues with the other sex or other gender, which is perfectly fine. Everyone deserves to express their opinion, have a thought. But my issue with these podcasts is the fact that most of the time they are speaking in generalization, as in saying the reason why Black men or the reason why Black women or all Black women or all Black men, and that is one of the quickest ways to piss me off personally and professionally, for the simple fact that that does not encompass all of Black men and all Black women. And then lastly, in one of the rare occasions where like I will click just to kind of see the whole video, the context of the whole video, they very seldom come to some sort of resolution. It's always more so kind of centered around like, let me blow off some steam about my experiences or my thoughts about how Black women or Black men are problematic in relationships or what needs to be changed, what I think they need to do. It's not rooted in this space of like, okay, well, let's figure out what the common ground is. Let's acknowledge each other's experiences, each other's truths, and figure out where do we go from here. It's more so just kind of like, let me get all this visceral out of my system and have a cute little sound bite that can get played over and over and over and over and over again.
I think it's the shock value to what you were saying. Like, I can't believe you said that to them, X, Y, Z, and the third. I agree with you that there's no common ground. And also I agree with you that these are their personal opinions on what men and women should be. But I do think that that's interesting, right? Because there are societal expectations of gender roles, right?
Yeah.
And then there are community expectations, and then you filter it down. Then it comes down to you and that person. What are you looking for out of that person? I think Black people are tripping if you're taking everything that's said of these things as gospel, because here's my logic, or here's my perception of it. It'd be one thing if you were taking this advice from like a marriage counselor, a quote unquote expert, right? And I'm not saying like you went to school and got a degree and everything, and that helps, but like, did you do research, write books? Are you good at mending relationships? Things like that? I think it's a little wild that you listen to a episode of a podcast from these random people and they're giving you this blanket statement of modern women are whores because of X, Y, Z, and the third. Modern men are broke because X, Y, Z, and the third.
Exactly.
I think that's wild because where's the context? Like, is this your opinion or is it fact? Is this your dating experience or this is a collective dating experience? Because actually me and you were talking to our producer about this, like, you know, the nuances of couple counseling, right?
Yeah.
Like, what if a husband and wife or a same-sex couple, heterosexual couple, whatever it is, they come to session and you agree with one over the other? Well, that's my value and I can't interject that into your relationship. Because your relationship is made up for you two.
Yeah.
And one thing you don't want to do in a couple sessions is take a side. Because if you take a side, you lose somebody.
Yeah.
But then also, here's the thing. Their version of reality isn't necessarily wrong because it's how they're looking at it based upon their experience.
Correct.
So I use that to say this, right? To make a statement like modern day women, and I'm pulling this out of thin air. I'm not saying that any particular person said that, but modern day women are whores because of their own OnlyFans or they're doing non-traditional things.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at it in context, the standards that those traditions were built upon, most of them aren't in existence anymore. Like, for instance, in order for a wife to be a stay-at-home wife, the man has to be able to make enough money to provide for everybody in the household. Those days are gone. They just are, right? So you want a woman that's going to stay at home and cook and do all those other things, But because they're opting to not do that because they want to go out and make a career for themselves, whatever that career is, you're instantly labeling them as a whore.
Yeah.
Because they decide to make an OnlyFans. But yet there are thousands of people who are putting money in their pockets that would maybe agree with you or disagree with you.
Yeah.
But that's your opinion of that person.
See, and you said something important, opinion. Now, I can respect a conversation about what your experience has been with the opposite sex or same sex, depending on who you are. And that's perfectly fine. But what drives me crazy about some of these clips I see or when I actually watch the video, it's people acknowledging it's their opinion, but then going further in the conversation as if it's fact. That is an interesting transition to
For
me.
them, it is, yeah. It's a fact of reality for them.
It's
I'm not saying they're right.
You're right. It's a fact of reality.
I could see why they go, because at that point it
Yeah.
turns into a debate.
But here's the thing, though. You're right. It's a fact of reality for them. But then when you throw out statements as in, like, when you throw out statements like, going from like, well, I feel or I believe to something like one crazy thing I heard was, because it transitioned quickly, was no black woman should propose to a black man because you're going to lose your power.
Who's going to lose their power?
A black woman.
The black woman will lose her power?
A black woman loses power and the black man also loses power in the context, talking about both sides. And my mom listened to that. I'm like, okay. And I was pausing because I was like, okay, you're going to clean that up a little bit. It just kept going and going and going. Because what I was waiting for it to hear is like, I feel or I believe, or based off of my religious belief, based off of my cultural belief, that is something that is a man's responsibility to do to a woman, for a woman.
I'm glad you said that, because in my mind when you said it, I was like, what's wrong with that? I agree with it. But then when you said based upon my belief, you're right. Yeah, based upon my religious and cultural belief, yeah, the man should be the one proposing to the woman.
And I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly fine with that because, again, that gives it context. But when you just kind of umbrella just throw that out there without its proper context, which seems to happen sometimes in these debates, to me, I'm pausing and looking because my thing is like, one, that's a judgment. Mm-hmm. Two, that's not factual.
Correct.
And then three, because it's a liberal side to me, as far as, well, I'll share my liberal views on this particular context. It's the case of, well, if it's two people
You're a liberal, Keith?
I'm as left as they probably come.
Okay. I find myself independent.
I find myself definitely more left
I'm not.
leaning.
I am not in the middle by no means at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
which is why I like in these relationship debates, I recognize, because again, giving y'all context, I recognize in these relationship debates, I am very liberal, and a lot of people are coming from more traditional, conservative backgrounds when they view relationships, and that is perfectly fine. I'm not gonna knock that. I may disagree with that. That's just me. But I don't like, and that even goes for people who think like me on the liberal side of things, I don't like when we start applying what it is that we think or believe as a truth for everybody. Mm-hmm. Now, it may be a truth for me. It may be true for my experience. It may be a truth for people in my orbit. But when we start speaking like these umbrella things that should apply to all black people or black couples, that's a huge problem because there's not a one size fits all for every single black couple. Like another thing that drives me crazy in these debates, because it's picked up fire within like the last 3 or 4 years on social media, which is like, oh, well, you the man, why you splitting 50-50 bills with your girl?
No,
See? Oh, here we...
I was actually going to say, go ahead.
So I got a question. Isn't all advice personalized in a sense? How do you take advice if it's not personalized from experience?
That's a good question. So is all advice personalized from an experience? The answer to that is yes. A bit of that advice is personalized when you're asking someone in a non-professional setting.
Yes.
When you're in therapy, though, I wouldn't say, well, there's an aspect of you in it, but it's rooted in the approach. When I say rooted in the approach is that what Dr. Keith said earlier is that I can't take my values and judgment and put it on you, right? For the sheer fact that that's now me judging you. Yes. And that's me thinking that my way of life suits your walk in life. I want to make that clear. My way in life does not suit your walk in life. So I might give you some advice rooted in the approach that I'm using to help you, meaning like how I'm treating you. So I might recommend a behavioral experiment based upon my advice internally, not to get too convoluted, but how I viewed your problem in my head, the recommended way I'm going to help you, my advice is going to be rooted in the theory, not necessarily me telling you how I would do that situation.
Is there any scenario where that's good?
What's good?
Telling somebody what to do.
If they're harming other people, yeah.
No, I'm just saying, like, is there any scenario where you give personalized advice and it still be good and professional?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there are times like, for instance, I'm thinking about most of my clients, most of the male clients who grew up in the hood, who struggle with anger. I've given my personal advice on how I did it to their situation, but I make it clear to them that that's how I did it. You don't got to do it that way, but because I've self-disclosed at that point, right? Like, I'm going to create a scenario. They struggle with disrespect in the workplace, and they don't know how to navigate that. I've struggled with that because I don't do well with disrespect. So I've given them, like, this is what I've done when I've been in workplace scenario, because they'll give me a scenario, and I give them a similar one that matches theirs. And I tell them, this is how I did it. You don't got to do it that way, but I just want to give you an option of something for your toolkit that you could pull to if you want to. They've actually said, no, I appreciate that. I'm going to try that and see if it worked. Then they'll come back next week and be like, yeah, it worked. Or they'll come back and tweak it a little bit. But to your point, yeah, some aspect of advice is definitely going to be personal. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I would say for personalized advice, for me personally, in the context of like a therapy session, I usually listen and I just put out the options, as in like, okay, so based off of what you said, you have these 2 or 3 or however many options to which how you can respond. Now, I would say, and this is where it gets personalized, I would say this option is probably not going to have the best outcome for the simple fact that it could lead to termination, it could lead to incarceration, or it could lead to a loss of relationship. These options probably going to fare better. So you might want to explore these options a little bit more or give them more thought. The thing about personalized advice is that you still have to give room, because that's exactly what Brian was doing, for them to make their own decision. That's the thing, and that's even coming outside of therapy. Whenever we're having conversations with our children, significant other, friends, our personalized advice still has to leave room to allow them to have the freedom to decide what it is that they want to do. It's not like you're talking to your child where it says like, no, you're going to bed right now to go and going to bed right now so you can get up and go to school tomorrow. That's something different. When we're talking grown adults, it's a case of, or even therapists to anybody, it's a case of, I'm going to give it I'm going to personalize it in a way to where it's understandable, you can connect to it, but I'm also going to leave it open to where it's ultimately, I recognize you're your own being with your own autonomy and you're going to do whatever you want to do, and that's perfectly fine.
And to your point earlier about the 50-50 question, right? I agree that's someone's personal opinion that, for instance, you married but you're going 50-50 on bills. If you believe that the man should pay everything in a marriage, that's your personal opinion. Because reality in modern day economics does not allow for that. Like I said earlier in the example, those days are gone as far as the man being given enough income at a working or middle class salary to cover everybody in the household. Now, this is my personal opinion. I think that every man, regardless of whether you're heterosexual or not, should be working to try to be able to provide everything for everybody in the household. I think that's a noble endeavor. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
If you fall short of it, you just fall short of it. But I don't think that me personally, and I'm not judging you if you don't agree, but you should never be complacent with where you are. You should always be trying to strive and grow. And a part of that as the man of the household is you should be striving to attain enough resources to take the pressure off of everybody else. But I can understand why somebody would be like, well, now you're putting a bigger burden on you. This is to your point earlier. I look at it from a spiritual background as well, that rooted in Christianity, that men were given the charge to toil the field.
Yeah.
We're the beast of burden. Whether you like it or not, that was our punishment. So we're built for that. But that's a personal opinion. And I agree with you that it's wild if you decide to go on, if you decide to listen to that podcast, and like you said, Keith, they go, women should be doing this. Bam. Based upon what?
Exactly.
And to what we were talking about before, you got to be careful with who you getting it from. Like, who you getting this advice from? Like, for instance, I didn't watch too many Kevin Samuel podcasts or interviews.
Oh, boy.
I didn't, right? I didn't watch a lot of them.
Yeah.
So I have very limited information when it comes to him. I know the snippet stuff. a lot of that stuff was his personal opinion and expectations about what women and men should be doing. I will say this: he was famous for giving women a lot of hassle, but from what I've understand from the people who follow him, he also held men accountable. So he did keep it balanced. But a lot of those things are his opinion. But my question is, what made Kevin Samuels the authority on how you should be living your life or going forward in your relationship? No one's necessarily the authority on how you should be living your life, but you got to be careful with like assuming that because this person said it because they got X amount of followers, it must be true.
You hit the nail right on the head because, in RIP to Kevin Samuels, majority of things he said, I did not agree with.
He was a noob, right?
He was frat. He was frat.
Right.
He was a noob.
Is it okay for me to say noob?
I mean, there's no law say you can't.
Okay, I was just calling him by his title. That's all. I just want to make sure I called him by the right.
I appreciate checking in.
Hey, man, I be trying to figure out these divine rules, man. I be like, what? Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Is it safe to call him that? I can't call him that?
I mean, you can. There's no rule.
Y'all be ready to die behind that, man.
Well, see, that's a separate podcast.
I agree with you, yeah.
But no, the thing about Kevin Samuels was this.
And there's nothing wrong with being willing to die, but like I was in the Army. I'm not willing to die behind it. I'm not.
Here's the thing I recognize for personalities like your Kevin Samuels, about your Candace Owens, not even though she's not in a relationship sphere, she's still a voice. You have these personalities that, for better or for worse, they articulate a certain viewpoint that a lot of people either struggle to articulate or they feel as though if they say it that somehow or another they're going to be viewed as problematic.
Right.
They say all the things that a lot of people think that, you know, for whatever reason, people like to say for being PC, that most people don't say. Right. And so, of course, they draw an audience because they're the provocateurs. And that's not to say that at times they're not saying things that aren't valid, because I don't want to sit here and say that Kevin Samuels or other people on other podcasts don't have valid points at times, because you can. Yeah. But it's just the fact that sometimes these points that they make, even though they may have validity to them, there's still a certain context that I get concerned about, that get lost in them. And particularly when we're talking about couples and relationships and these gender wars, there's a certain context that always gets taken out in regards to why things are the way that they are. As you mentioned, for instance, one of those contexts is economics. But when you mention that, some people look like, oh, you're just using that as an excuse. You could still pay all the bills and work 2-3 jobs and be able to take, if you really love your friend. And that's when I pause and be like, I'd be like, whoa. Or my personal favorite is like, well, then you need to become an entrepreneur, or you need to go out here and get a job that pays more.
It ain't that easy.
That part, as if like, that's not that easy.
It is not.
So let's not throw that out there.
To Dr. Keith's points, because me and Dr. Keith are entrepreneurs, it's not easy getting it off the ground, buddy. And then maintaining it and then trying to grow it, it's not that easy. But go ahead, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Or then you have like some of these sound bites, because I remember Ebony K. Williams, she got in trouble.
For not wanting to date the bus driver?
For not wanting to date the bus driver. Which
I can see where she's coming from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a case of, in that, because I agree with some things, and then some things I was like, this is kind of crossing the line into more of a judgment. She wasn't wrong for the reasons that she listed for her personally. She could not do it. But then sometimes, and this was a great example of it, it crosses a line where, like, even if she didn't mean for it to, it sounds like it's a judgment against people who are actually in that position. Because at one point, when she tried to come back, I won't say tried to clean it up, she stood, I will give this about Ebony Williams, she stood 10 toes down on what she said. But she had to come back and contextualize it, saying, like, I'm not judging a bus driver or saying that the bus driver does not deserve respect. But what kind of got her in the hole again was the fact that she said that she felt as though they should be striving for more. And again, that's an opinion. But sometimes I think that if we're not in our conscious mind, those opinions come out as judgments if they don't come out as like these umbrella statements to words that we feel as though this should apply to all Black people.
I think that there was one, I don't think her opinion is necessarily wrong. I like how you articulated it, because, and I'm going to touch on why I like it in a second. But the thing is that I think that there's nothing she could have said to soften her perspective for other people to be able to receive it. You're going to offend people. You just are. Like Martin Luther King offended people. Jesus Christ offended people. The Honorable Prophet Muhammad offended people. These are all people that came preaching messages of peace. You know, like they're trying to just better everybody on the planet.
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela offended people, right? So what I'm saying is that there are certain things where I can understand why she stood 10 toes down, because you're just going to offend somebody. But going back to what I said is what you had said, as far as I like how you articulated it, because she made it clear that it was her opinion. And she stood 10 toes down on it because it's her opinion. But the issue that you come across is that people identify with things to their detriment sometimes. Like, for instance, people who took offense to her comment, she said bus drivers. Bus drivers are working class or middle class help. Bus operators.
Thank you.
Let me
Don't
stop
let our father
right
hear
now.
this.
If
You
you
call him
live
a bus
in
driver.
Washington, D.C.,
You are a bus operator.
and you don't call metro operators bus operators, good luck.
Exactly.
Good luck to you.
Which is why I will be 100% honest.
But hold on,
because-
before you do that,
Yeah,
I'm going to finish my thought. Bus operators fit in a category, right? Like, you may not be a bus operator, but you may be a working class or middle class, however you look at it, because enough bus operators make enough money where they can be middle class, right? Potentially what you heard was, and I really mean this mentally, cognitively, that you didn't hear her say bus operator or bus driver. You heard her say working or middle class. Average folks. That's why I say, like, we expand how we view ourselves into so many broad categories that different things or different people's opinion will offend us because we'll lump ourselves into it. That's why I think some people got offended, because you didn't hear, well, you may have heard bus driver, bus operator, but also you feel like, well, that I'm in that bracket, right? I'm in that tax bracket. I'm in that class bracket. She might be talking about me. Or now you're just being insensitive to all the people, even though she gave her opinion. But what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, one, I recognize, because even I had to catch myself. When she made that statement, it triggered me for obvious reasons, because our father, hard worker, was a bus operator for 31 years. Actually now 41, because he left just to go back work part-time because her dad doesn't sit still. It did trigger me. So I had to kind of like pause and take a step back and think about, okay, you know, get from behind your emotions. And again, using this as an example, it's also one of those situations where when people make these type of statements, again, their opinions, and everyone is entitled to their opinion. It's just a case that sometimes it's like it lacks a certain level of context too. In her case, I would say it lacks a certain level of context. And I kind of hold her more accountable because of her level of intellect and education, is the fact that it's a situation where, first off...
But she made it clear that was her opinion, though.
Yeah, I know, but...
So why is she wrong?
I'm not saying she's wrong in her opinion, but it's just more so the lack of thoughtfulness to a certain extent in their opinion. Because put it this way, what if it's a situation where, like, being a bus operator is the absolute best someone can do?
Yeah, that's her opinion, though. And I'm not saying that it was heard as a judgment. But it wasn't a judgment as far as the occupation. Like, when I initially heard it, I got where she was coming from. But I was listening at it through a different lens.
Well, the way I was listening to it...
Because she said her issue wasn't the occupation. It was the mindset of the person in the occupation. Her answer was, they said, correct me if I'm wrong. She said, are you saying you wouldn't date a bus driver? She said, as long as he's working to own the bus or something along those lines. I get it. She's willing to date a mindset, probably followed with action as well.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, the reason why I said, are black people tripping for listening to some of these podcasts and running around with them? Yes, I'm putting the onus at the feet of black people, not the people on them. Now, granted, there's some level of responsibility for those people, because we already hashed that out. They're not giving their context, and there's a level of responsibility. Like, me and you have a level of responsibility, right?
I agree.
Like, we're both doctors, so we have to be cautious with how we proceed with some of the things we say, because it might affect people. They might pick it up and run with it, because not everybody's needs to go out and be a mental health therapist. They trust us to do that. Correct. And then bring it to them. So therefore they come to us and be like, there's somebody that's like, well, Dr. Brian and Keith said, I need to meditate 15 minutes a day in order to deal with my anxiety. They don't know the science behind it, but they're going to go, they said it, I'm going to do it. Right. That's why I say, like, now, to that regard of what you're saying, I agree. There's a responsibility on that regard. But I say that black people are tripping for listening to some of these podcasts is because at some point you got to make sure you're paying attention to what they're saying. If that person actually says, this is my opinion, in that moment, I would encourage all black people to be like, he's speaking about his way of living.
Correct.
And he's sharing it with you. And I only use that with the Ebony K. Williams example because she said it was her. She made it clear it was her opinion.
Correct.
She don't think that like all black. And that's if I'm remembering the clip correct. I didn't take it as she was saying all black women or all black men should date X, Y, and Z. No, like Kevin Samuels was different. Like Kevin Samuels, if I'm not mistaken, made it clear that these modern day black women need to be doing. He made a blanket statement. It was blanket. It was, high value men want this type of woman.
Yeah.
Even in that example there, how does he speak for all high value men? Is he a high value man?
He can't. Whether he was a high value man or not, I can't speak to, but he can't. But to that Ebony K. Williams point is this. The reason why I hold her to a higher standard as someone who does television is the fact that it wasn't very well articulated, because you said it yourself. I surmised from what she said that this is what she meant. But as you can also see, if we're not specific, because what you surmised was very well, as in like, look, it's not so much a bus driver. It's more so a situation if it could be anybody. If they don't have a certain mindset of ambition and drive, I can't be with them. That would have been perfectly fine.
You're right. And to your point, you're right, because I could also just be going by what I heard. That might not have been her intention either. So I want to make that clear. But to your point, I see what you mean, because there is a responsibility on her, because she's been on TV long enough to know like clear articulation is important. But to give her grace, I still think that no matter what you say sometimes, even in the best intention, it will offend somebody.
And you like, 100% correct. And I also say this, Ebony Williams, I love you. I love watching your show on the Griot. Keep it up. It's wonderful. That was just one clip where it was like, this wording is making me feel away, and I will acknowledge that. But not every feeling is necessarily valid. But please continue.
No, because like to your point, like you're a liberal, right?
Very.
There's nothing wrong with that. I see nothing wrong with liberalism. Conservatism is a little different. But when I say that I'm independent, is because I always say this, and this I'll make sure I tie this up together very nicely, right? Because we're talking about black people tripping.
Yeah.
I literally look at things from the perspective of what has Malcolm X taught me about, like, for instance, taking into account the black community and everything that I think about, because I want all human beings to do good, but I'm very overly invested and concerned about my community. So when it comes to liberalism and conservatism, I look at it as which policy is going to help black people, because I take the perspective of I think that black people overly support. You know what? I'm glad I said that out loud, because liberalism and the Democratic Party are not always synonymous.
Yeah,
they're not.
Thank you, because I was going to.
Yeah, they're not. They're not overly synonymous. So I'm glad I actually said that out loud. So I'm gonna keep it with that. Like, they're not overly synonymous. I think that black people overly trust the Democratic Party, and that happens to be the party that identifies with liberalism
100% agree.
To their detriment. Hence why I'm glad I said it out loud, because that's what I'm actually talking about. Democrats versus Republicans. So when I think of liberalism, I do think of Democrats. However, when I think of Democrats, I do not think that they solely have the best interest for black people. Black people tend to benefit more from their policies than the conservative ones, but I don't necessarily think that black people need to just jump right into being loyal to them. In that sense, I think black people are tripping 100%.
Oh, agree, 100%. I will say this. When I say liberal, I don't necessarily associate that with being a part of any political party. Now, granted, I am a registered Democrat because I tend to vote Democrat. But when I say liberal, I mean, I tend to think about policies and people and systems and social welfare in a very non-traditional type of way, to where as though I do believe in needle exchange. I do believe in harm reduction if we're talking about substance abuse disorder. I don't believe in the whole idea of like, oh, well, we can just send them to a treatment facility in cold turkey. I do believe in more progressive. Exactly. I do believe in more progressive well-researched, because I also want to put that out there, well-researched ways of dealing with old problems in new ways. So when I say liberal, I mean that, as in, like, I do leave an open mind to the possibility of new ways or not new ways also, but new methodologies of addressing certain problems, or even new ways of looking at people in a different light. So when I say that, I tend to think that way. But that also applies to a lot of the things that we hear in these podcasts, almost anything that I hear, where it's like, it's more so kind of like, and again, I will have to acknowledge my bias as a human being, but also as a scholar, where I hear certain things, and if I feel as though it's pigeonholing people, and particularly if it's pigeonholing Black people into having to be a certain type of way, and I will have to check that, because I also acknowledge the fact that sometimes in my mind I may go down a different rabbit hole as far as like what the person may actually be saying. But liberal in the sense of, I do believe in an open space to where as though we can give people room to be whoever it is they need to be, how they need to be, and that goes especially for romantic relationships.
I do wish you had a female on for this topic right now, because
that's what needs to be a part 2.
I was going to say these dating like standards are Black people tripping, man. You can't take nobody to Cheesecake Factory. You can't be depressed.
Well,
you can't cry at your wedding. All these things that men aren't supposed to do. I get it. Some of it's just clickbait, but there's somebody running around thinking that this is true right now, and I think that's wild.
That is the scary part. And to the defense, to even argue against my own point.
To their defense?
That's
that Black men can't can't be depressed?
No, not that.
Oh.
To the defense of the people that I've been critiquing in regards to like the podcasters, to their defense, it is a case of they are expressing simply their opinion. Now, how they articulate it, that's something completely different. If they run with it like it's fact, that's something completely different. But I also acknowledge the fact that we tend to listen to speakers, newscasters, podcasters who speak to a certain viewpoint or maybe even a certain bias that we have, because we're looking for that confirmation. And then we run with that confirmation because this person has a big platform and they said it as if it's actual fact. And my frustration with that, particularly as Black people, certain people with certain platforms, no judgment on them, they may express their opinion, and then we run with it as fact without doing our proper research on whatever the set topic may be.
I don't think that we should be. I think that the person who's doing the presenting should make that research incorporated into what they're saying.
100% agree with that.
Because the thing is, like you said, most people, to give everybody the grace they need is this. People turn to these people with big platforms, like we said earlier, because they trust us, right? They trust what we're saying. Therefore, it's incumbent upon you to make that information readily available to them sometimes, depending on what you're talking about.
Yes.
Because I don't expect, when I use that example that you should be meditating 15 minutes a day for approximately 3 months to deal with your anxiety, you'll see incredible changes in you. I don't expect you to literally go and do the research on it, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to parse out all the neurological benefits or the neurological changes that come about from it. But I do want to put it in a way that's easy for you to understand.
Yeah.
I think that that's the response, personal opinion. I think that it's the responsibility of the presenter to do that for people. Like right now, the reason why you should meditate 15 minutes a day for approximately 3 months is because when they look at neural scans of your amygdala, which is the fear center of your brain, in connection to your insula, which is the thing that lets you feel into your body, and the part of your brain that's called the ACC that does the self-regulating, you see the amygdala turn down and those other two areas turn up. That helps you to calm down your fight or flight system when you're anxious. Now, I've given that to you so you don't got to go look it up, or so when you go look it up, it's easier for you to find. To that example, I agree with you. I think that, I don't know if we were agreeing or disagreeing, but either way, to what I'm saying is that I do think that when you make certain statements to what that's what it is, to what you're saying earlier, you do have to provide that proper context to it. Because a podcast can be a beautiful and a bad thing. Social media can be a beautiful and bad thing. Sure. It gives you access to unlimited knowledge or access to experts, right?
And to go back to what you're saying, how Black people lost their mind. Of course, when we say that, we don't mean all Black people. I would say to a certain extent, yes,
irony.
because here's the thing. Two things aren't happening, and it kind of scares me. One, presenting data on your platform about something and presenting data in its proper context. Let me put that out there. But then two, as a public, where we should be encouraging more critical thinking, are we going back to double check that data to see if this person is being accurate in what it is that they're saying? Now, I get it as a presenter, as a scholar, as a researcher, it's your responsibility to be transparent with all of that information up front, and you should be all the time, no matter what your platform is. But at the same time, I'm also someone where, this is just me, if you present me all of the information, granted, I'm not going to necessarily look at all of it, but I am definitely going to check some of those sources just to make sure, like, okay, you're presenting this in the right way, or if there's something that's being left out, or to gather more information. And I feel as though because I understand people don't have the time, or maybe sometimes it can be a little complicated, because that's not happening on both sides, it becomes these opinions and these thoughts that people just run with because it sounds like it's factual. Or
It
that it's
agrees
true.
with the way they look at life.
Exactly. Without the actual, and I know we're in this weird place of information, misinformation, disinformation, and questioning information, without the proper vetting.
No, I agree. Like, there's a level for you to go out and look at it on your own, but I look at it as a provider-consumer thing, right? And this could be me. This could be a limited way of looking at it. So when I say provider-consumer, I mean if you're the person giving the information, right? And that means the other person receiving is the consumer. It's just like with any other product. They're not going to go, not everybody has the luxury, like you said, to go out and look for, like, what's this chemical, what's that chemical, or where's this source and where's that source. I do think that at some point you have to, I guess this is to your point, question who you're getting it from. Like that level of trust you have in them. Because here's the thing, in that example where we were talking to our producer about couples counseling, right?
Yeah.
Like Ayanna Fixed My Life, terrible.
Well, in her defense,
Terrible.
In her defense, she's never said
She's
a
never
couples
said she was a
counselor,
couple counselor. You're
therapist,
right.
any
And
kind. She's a life coach.
Yeah, I have no issue with Ayanna, but if you like, that is a terrible example of couples therapy. Iyanla. I apologize. Say it again.
Iyanla.
What's another name for her? I don't want to keep butchering.
Miss Van Zant.
Miss Van Zant.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Miss Van Zant. I'm going to keep it like that because I don't want to butcher this wonderful black woman's name. But that is a bad example of how to repair a couple. And I know she never marketed herself that way, but if you turn that on, you would look at Miss Van Zant and think like she must be a couples expert, right?
Yeah.
She is not. She is not equipped, nor trained, nor prepared to repair a couple. As a matter of fact, there have been several people who have been on her show that talked about how bad of an experience it is. But I use her as an example, not to beat up on her, because there's some validity in some of the things she's done. But it's one of those things where you have to be careful where you're going, what well you're drinking from.
Yeah.
For what reason?
Question. So I got two questions. I'm gonna start with this one. So do y'all think, where's the balance of personal experience and practice and study to become a really effective therapist?
So practice and study.
Mike.
I'm sorry. Practice and study and research. So here's the thing. Your personal experience, you can examine it, you can talk about it, and it's real to you. But then you have to go out there and you have to get research and data to back it up or to give it proper context, right? So that's the reason why that's important, because we all have unique experiences that are very real for us, but that does not necessarily mean that that's a universal thing. But when you find research that people have spent years doing and talking to different people and gathering information that can substantiate, like, this is a legitimate thing based off of all these years and all this time to support it, then we can say that this is a very real thing. It's kind of like I want to give a good example, but I won't do that. I'll just more so just say this. Good, for me personally, good research or a good book or a good podcast or newscast, whatever, they find that balance of, like, you make it a personal story based off of people's experiences, but then you find the research and the data that supports it, that says, like, this is a very real thing and this is an example, or these are examples of people who are living it or dealing with it.
Yeah, and to your question, you said, and what was those three domains again? You said personal experience, research, and practice, right? And you're asking for, like, from a therapy standpoint?
I'm saying, so, like, do you all feel like you need a good combination of both in order to be an effective therapist?
Yes.
Yes.
You need a
Yes.
Yeah,
like,
you need a
both. Like, you got, practice, you need practice, you need research, but, like, do you all feel, in your opinion, like, what you've been through, what you've been able to get through, on top of your education, on top of experiencing, practicing being a therapist, like, what's that balance like for y'all versus when you see people on the internet just shooting from the hip.
You got to have that personal experience because this is what that experience is like as a therapist, right? Like, for instance, there are certain techniques that I will and will not recommend based upon, like, you've been in a crappy job. I've been in a crappy job. You're dealing with kids that don't listen. I've dealt with kids that don't listen, right? So there's a way that research and school will tell you do this technique with them. When the rubber meets the road, no, it ain't going to work out that way because, for instance, you're struggling with anxiety, and I tell you to challenge the thought that caused the anxiety. But if you're in that high stress environment, you're not going to be in a position to start challenging your thoughts. You're dealing with too much stimulation going on. Whether it's your boss getting on your nerves, coworkers doing too much, the kids running around, it's not going to work out that way. Yeah. And I know there's more for all the other therapists. Listen, there's more nuance to it, but I'm just using a crude or simple example, right? That's where your experience of life comes into play to helping that person, right? It's just one of those things. Like, for instance, if you're one of those people who are trying to deal with their PTSD in a certain setting, right? I want to be less aggressive when I'm in that setting. Well, my experience of being in that setting will inform how I think this technique will work over that technique when you're in that setting. Your personal experience accounts for something. Like, for instance, giving them their grace again. Like, everybody on these podcasts that are saying, like, women and men should do this, yeah, your personal experience gave you that. And then your experience of hearing other people gave you that as well. And it's something you say, and please correct me if I'm saying it wrong. It's kind of like you take your experience and then you go out and find out if people via research have had similar or near to experiences. From there, your personal experience of how you navigate it may help them. And that's the part where it's finding that balance that you're asking about, right? Because it may help them, but you don't have to run around thinking that your truth is the absolute truth. And that's the problem. Like, that conversation between that millionaire and that guy, the blue collar worker, he said, if a man is spending 50-50 with his wife and has his wife cooking and cleaning, that's emotional abuse. That's your opinion. Like, that's your opinion. That's not a ground-given fact because life doesn't always play out that way. Like, he said himself, like, then you cut down your means and you and your wife live in a place where you can afford to pay for everything and she can just stay at home and work on the kids. Well, what does that look like? Yeah. Like, does that look like what? Y'all all living in an efficiency? Y'all all living in a one-bedroom apartment? To me personally, that sounds wild. Like, wait a minute. So me and my lady have the opportunity to combine our incomes to live in a comfortable neighborhood with access to resources that's not a food desert. Food desert meaning that your local grocery store, next county over, right? We don't live in that environment. So you're telling me that it's better, in your opinion, that we live, I was just thinking about it, kind of threw me off. We live in a hood, in a one-bedroom environment, gunshots everywhere. I pay for everything. And that area that's going to produce complex trauma is better than us working together to build ourselves up together in our relationship together. That's, to your point, like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, that, wild.
No, it is. And okay.
Wild that you could say that all men should have that mindset.
But see, that's the reason why I have issues with some of these podcasters giving like relationship advice, because there's a certain level of objectivity that's just lacking. And when you're a therapist and you're dealing with couples, or even you're dealing with a single client that's asking advice about dating or relationships, there's still a certain level of objectivity that we're forced to maintain. Now, is a little bit of your bias going to come into play? Yes, that's true for everybody in almost anything. You can't help your experiences and how you view things, but you're trained to where you recognize that cannot be the focus. And you also are trained to look at the person and each client in each situation in its proper context to realize that's not going to work here.
Yeah, no, I agree.
50-50 is not going to work here, which is why I'm always, and you know what, now I'm glad we're talking about this aloud. Maybe it's the reason why when I hear those things, I cringe, because I recognize that based off of my training, I'm listening to this advice and I cringe and I get concerned because it's like, this is going to hurt somebody.
Right, 1,000%.
This is
I
going to
agree
hurt
with
somebody.
that. It is because there's going to be someone that's going to listen to you, Joe Citizen, no training, but you got a big platform.
Yeah.
And they're going to run around. And to your point, I just created a scenario while you're saying it. There's going to be a woman that's going to hear that and potentially walk forward for the next just 3 years. I ain't say the rest of her life. 3 years with the mindset of, if he can't afford to take care of everything, I don't want him. What? You're gonna block your blessings, limit your opportunities, operate under that guise, and I'm not judging you for it. But the thing that's kind of odd to me is because he said it, and the thing is, he's not an expert in that field. And when I keep in mind what I'm saying when I say expert is, it's not that you gotta go off and become a doctor, but has he done any research, speaking engagements? He's an expert, not even a leading expert. You know, are there testaments to people that have come and been like, he's actually helped me? Or is it just Joe Citizen, millionaire, Joe Citizen, big platform that's telling you, I'm trying to think of some of the crazy things that we may have heard before. Like, if you sleep with 5 men in a year, you're a whore. What? What?
Because I remember, oh God, it was some clip that I saw where like that was the topic. I can't remember what. I wish I knew what the podcast, where it came from, but I remember it was something like that. And a young lady had asked a guy, "Okay, so if you sleep with 5 women in 1 year, what does that make you?" And he said, "That makes me a whore maker."
Yeah, that's wild to me, man.
It is wild.
Yeah, because in my head, I don't.
It's wild.
One, I don't really want to know how many people you've been with this year. That's not my concern. I'm here to get to know you.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get to know all that. That's a lot of information at one time.
And I get this is advice. Not advice. Sorry, these are opinions. These are opinions, and people are just putting their opinions out there, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, put it out there. But my concern is, again, looking at things through a therapist's lens, is that when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, I would never say that to somebody, for the simple fact that, like, how is that going to help the dynamics between men and women?
No, I agree with you. And another thing was when you said that, right? Like, I asked myself, would I think that person's a whore? I was like, no, I wouldn't think they're a whore. I think that's wild. I need the context, though. Because it's kind of one of those things where, like, I don't know where life took you, that you wanted to sleep with 5 men. Is that even a lot? Like, if I was single, and I slept with 5 women within a year, that don't sound like a lot to me.
And not to mention the fact that for some people, body count doesn't really matter. They don't care.
Like, in my opinion, at a certain age, we all up there. Or we're not. But it don't matter. Like, at a certain age, like, you up there.
Yeah.
Like, you just are. So
Yeah.
what does that matter? But to some people, I get it. It does matter. And I'm not saying that you're wrong that it does matter. But even in that regard, like, I don't know what podcast you started on, but that's kind of like, man, like 5 and you a whore? And then if I do it, I'm a whore maker?
Yeah. I wish I actually, because I saw the
I do
clip.
think that sometimes people say stuff because they think it sounds catchy.
Well, that's the big part of it, too. It's just a case of a lot of these things are made to sound catchy. And then also, to a certain extent, I also recognize that, listen to some of these podcasts, when they get in these conversations about men and women, again, it's not anything about cohesion. It's not anything about healing. It's not anything, to a certain extent, about understanding. It really is just people getting, like, their personal trauma, their visceral,
out
their
on the
anger,
airwaves. This their version of
rage
therapy
out there for other people in a weird way to validate or co-sign or to gain them followers or listeners. And
No, I
I think
agree.
that, again, through the lens of a therapist, I think that's awful.
I think that controversy sells. I do. So I think they say stuff for clickbait. And producer, we about to go over. I ain't even gonna hold you. Because one thing I think that black people are tripping on is, we were talking about it off camera. I'm just gonna bring it on camera. Like, if you grew up in the suburbs and you run into the hood, that's wild to me. That is wild. I can understand why though, because the way I had articulated was this: is that lifestyle's glamorized. So if you T.I. and King's dad's lifestyle was glamorized. I can understand why he going to his grandmama's house to see what it's like, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's wild coming out of that lifestyle to want to run to it. I think that's crazy.
Well, I would agree. Here's
I think black people are tripping on that one.
Okay, here's the thing about
Respectfully.
look. I will say this.
No judgment, though, but it is crazy.
I will say this for me personally, in situations like that, and this just comes from working with kids in particular, I really look at it from like a case to case basis as to like, okay, running from something, running towards something. What is this? In some instances, it could be a case of like, okay, this really doesn't have its proper context as far as like all the opportunities, resources have been given to you while you're running. And then you talk to a young person and say like, well, I haven't really felt connected to those things because even though they're available to me, I really haven't felt connected to them, but I feel connected to this. Okay, that gives it context. Or if it's a situation where like, you know, all that glitters isn't gold as far as like, y'all think everything is going good over there, but actually, no, I'm running from it because it's not. And this is the only thing I can think of to run to next. So I always try to think about those things in their context. But in the scenario that you gave, if it's just a case of running because, oh, I feel like this is where authenticity lies, or running because it's like, oh, well, this is the real, then I'll quote you as you quote it. That is wild.
That is wild. That is wild. But to your point, no, you're right. Like every behavior serves a purpose. So one thing I do want everybody to know is that all behavior serves a purpose. Human beings do not waste their behavior at all. It may look weird from the outside looking in at another person, but we do not waste our actions because in our mind, that was the solution to something. That helped us achieve a goal, right? So if you're running to it, you're doing it for a reason. Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe you feel like your identity there, whatever it may be. I'm not going to limit the scope to a handful of things it could be, but it's just one of those things where also like from the outside looking in though, like I said before, using King as an example, because I don't know where his headspace is or what his mindset is. He may be valid in how he's looking at it. I would have to sit with him to talk to him about it. But to run from a mansion, you're a millionaire.
Yeah.
Bro, you are King. You are a millionaire.
Yeah.
You are the son of a millionaire. You know, I don't know what your pockets look like. You a son of a millionaire. To lead that, to want to run over the bankhead where your dad grew up at, just to see what it's like.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, but to want to like he clawed his way out, just so you wouldn't go back.
See, the funny thing is, and this is the reason why when we're having conversations about these type of topics, again, bias.
Because I don't know what's glamorous. I'm sorry, little brother, because we talked about it before. I don't know why everybody wanted to come to see what pissy hallways, shootouts, drug deals, like. Well, there's movies on it. You know what I'm saying? Like we literally grew up on Ridge Road in Anacostia, Section 8 housing. Like we've normalized at one point hearing gunshots like it's a doorbell, knowing that that's too far to be near me. Oh, that was close. Without even thinking about it. I'll never forget the time I was sitting on the bed, heard gunshots in the alley. I didn't even react. I just slid down on the floor to make sure nothing went through the window. Kept playing the video game like it was. I didn't even hit the pause button. I was like, pop, pop, slid down, kept playing the game. We just waited an hour and got back up on the bed. Well, so I think it's just like what is the. No, I guess I just said it out loud. The desire is just out of curiosity sometimes. You just want to see it.
Exactly. And then, oh gosh, because a couple of things. One, curiosity. Two, some people, it's a case of they have to touch the stove to see that it's actually hot. Because even if you try to tell them, don't touch it, it's going to burn you.
No, man, that's true.
They're just one of those people. It's kind of like they have to learn from experience. But I will say this. Our topic at hand is that the type of conversation that we're having is that I wish that more podcasts, particularly talk about relationships, would have, as in like, well, let's lay this all out here. There's several different ways of kind of viewing this. This isn't just a narrow topic. Like when we're talking 50-50, it's not just a case of, oh, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. It's more nuanced than that, as in like, okay, so what's going on with this particular couple to where as though like 50-50 would make sense? Because if they're doing 50-50 and it's been working for a lot of couples, there has to be a reason why they're doing it, and it makes sense from an economic or financial standpoint. But I feel like oftentimes it's not like a broad, nuanced conversation happening to where as though, okay, you're not just kind of focusing in on one aspect of a problem concerning males and females. We're talking about a particular topic that's very expansive to where so we have to look at all these different vantage points to say like these are probably the reasons why. Whether we agree with them or not, something completely different, but we're given like a balanced perspective. But then again, one of my friends also told me, well, if I wanted that, I would just watch the news or I would watch a documentary. That's not what I listen to my podcast for.
No, that's fair. And then while you were saying, I was thinking about like, I guess it's going to come down to pick and choose what you want, right? But don't take it as gospel. Like one person's opinion and the way that they've achieved success doesn't match yours. It just doesn't. It's not going to be a 1-for-1 swap every time. But another thing I think is crazy is like, why invite a bunch of sex workers on your podcast to tell them that they're like to just basically judge them and tell them they're whores? Like, that's weird to me.
Okay, see, my question is this.
Like, you have an opportunity to understand, why are you in this lifestyle? What led you to this way? Like, what keeps you in this lifestyle? Instead, you come in there to be like, and I'm thinking about a couple clips that go in my head, like, women like you are just whores. You're the representation of a deteriorating society. I'm like, you put them on there to say that? I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the symbol of you.
Which is, okay, that in itself, excuse my language.
Crazy.
I was going to say crazy. I was going to use another four-letter word, but I'll keep it PG. That is crazy, 100%. But I'm always curious to know, for instance, bringing it back to, like, for instance, Kevin Samuels. Me personally, at a certain point, I stopped getting mad at Kevin Samuels for saying what he was saying. I mean, still hold him accountable. Because reality situation, after a certain point, everybody that went on that podcast
wanted to hear what
knew what the podcast was about. So it's a situation where it's like, I stopped feeling less bad for the person, because it's a case of, but you're walking into this, for whatever reason you're walking into this, knowing that he's going to say something very vicious and very mean. So I stopped thinking that way. It got more so to a place more so kind of like, less like, okay, this poor person. It got more so to a place of like, well, that's a problematic thought.
Yeah, at some point, like, you going to the watering hole at this point. You're drinking the water from there.
So in that situation, that podcast, a part of me, and that's not to put it on the women who came on there, because I'm curious to know if they were brought under the false pretenses, as far as if it was going to be like a conversation about, well, what is the life of a sex worker, to give it more balance, to give it more nuance, to talk about that experience, that lifestyle. If they were lied to, that's something completely different. But if they knew what it was, a part of me is always curious, like, so what was the benefit or the motive? Was it just for recognition or attention? Was it you wanted to get up on here and give him the riot act because he thought he was going to turn on you, but you instead turned it on him? I'm always curious about what brings you onto a podcast, especially if it's a well-known one, or if you've even vetted that podcast to see what it is that they do when they bring you on.
No, at some point you chose to walk into that firing squad. Like, this podcast is not going to do anything for you, but you chose to go in there. All right, that's your choice. But to that point as well, right? You said something that was interesting. After a while, people are going to go knowing the person that they're listening to. And I don't always fault the person that they're listening to sometimes, right? Because at some point, now you're just choosing to be here. It's literally like Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump has been proven to be wrong more often than anything else, right? But yet there are people out there that just keep listening to him.
Or his base argues the fact that, like, no, he's not wrong. Like, this is academia is liberal and biased.
Exactly. So at some point, it's kind of like, is it on him or is it on the people that keep supporting him? Because at some point, when I say controversy sells, if me and you started saying some wild stuff on our podcast, like wild supporting racism stuff as two black people, guarantee you we'd rise in recognition, not notoriety, but recognition a whole lot faster than the route that we're probably taking, right? But that's because sensationalism sells. And then people could be out there proving us wrong left and right. Promise you they'll still listen.
Which you're right, because I feel like also another part of the podcast component, or just people that in the media component, is I think sometimes we do look for people or podcasts to get us revved up so we can work out and blow out some steam ourselves, so we can go on, and not saying it's wrong, but we can go on our diatribes and their comments about how they got this all effed up or how they got it all wrong. So you're right. I do agree that controversy sells because people either want to be shocked or they want to be angry.
No, I agree with you. And I'll say this in closing, right? To your point, it's kind of like, remember the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe?
I can never forget it. We saw it when it first came out.
All right, so there's a scene in there where one of the senators was talking about how Caesar was a genius for creating the Colosseum. He said he's going to give them violence, he's going to give them death, and the people are going to love him for it. Yeah, I equate that to what you just said. I equated to that. It's like there are times where people go and listen to people with different views for them just to get riled up to say something, or people who have the same views as them just to get riled up and say something. Because I have clients who have had horrible experiences with women that now they have a jaded perspective. And that some of the things that these other podcasts are saying that have a negative view of women, it now resonates with where they are in life right now. So they go to this watering hole to feed how they're looking at reality. So I say that to say, no, there's a point, there's a validity to what you're saying. But we're going to wrap it up here, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe, share, because we're trying to give as much free information out to the people as we can. See you back here next time for another episode on For Us Therapeutics.